Hello and welcome to the Bink Show. This is where we explore how counselors like you look to balance their income through networking, knowledge, and success. So today I am super excited to talk to the fabulous psychotherapist, Michael Toller. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Andrea. Nice to be here.
Thank you. And thank you so much for sharing your time with us and your experience and knowledge today. I think this is going to be very intriguing because actually you've got lots of different angles to your work, haven't you?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, which is why I'm here because I'm
Yes.
obviously interested to help you and other people think about how how that's come about and how they might do that for themselves.
That's right. So first of all, Michael, tell us about how you got into the wonderful world that we know as psychotherapy.
Okay, so I have to go quite a way back now, maybe 15 years or so. I was doing something completely different. I was running a promotion, music events, promotions company, really busy with that. It wasn't something I'd sort of expected to do. I drifted into it, but
Right.
picked it up and ran with it and was really enjoying that. Um, and then it got to a point where I was thinking really carefully about the next phase of my life, particularly in relation to starting a family. And I realized that the work I was doing then, which was often about late nights and working really spending a lot of time working, wasn't really going to work with what I imagined family life would be like. So I started thinking quite carefully about changing the direction of my career. And through personal experience of mental health issues in my family and for me as well, early in my life, I've sort of had an interest in counseling, psychotherapy, and did an intro course, really liked it, started to get a feel for what that work might be like, and ended up doing a training. And then quite a few years down the line, making the shift and then setting up ultimately in private practice as a counselor and psychotherapist with coaching alongside, which I sort of discovered through all of that. I discovered coaching and did a training in that. So really doing those two things and then, yeah, that's it really. That's where it's got me today.
And that's actually interesting, isn't it? Because I think a lot of people are now exploring this sort of combination of the counseling, psychotherapy, and coaching because it's very, very
Yeah.
good work, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think I see them as really different processes and I do them very differently. I'm working with different what do we say? Like, I guess client bases, if you want to use a sort
Yes.
of more commercial term, but in I guess in sort of more kind of applied terms, I'm finding that people are coming into counseling or psychotherapy for very different reasons than a coaching process,
Yeah.
which we could talk about, I guess, a lot more, but isn't necessarily the thing we're here to talk about. But essentially to say that, yeah, I do these two different things. They're kind of complementary in some ways, not least practically in terms of running my business, because I do find that um, people come for coaching and psychotherapy from different places, and it means that there's a bit of a leveling out there maybe of how clients find me and what how many people I'm working with in one versus the other at any one time, and that's quite good because I think there are sort of ups and downs often
Yes,
as
actually.
counselors.
Yeah, and we were talking about this with the sense that even, I suppose, psychotherapy or coaching, you've still got the one-to-one
Mhm.
clients come, clients go. So that sort of it's unpredictable, isn't it? So it's
Mhm.
not necessarily, it might be nice and regular and calm and everybody's there for
Yeah,
a period of time. And then suddenly people are on holiday or,
yeah, yeah,
something happens in your life as
yeah.
well. So something to happen in your life, like for example, for me, earlier this year, my son ended up breaking his ankle and in
Okay.
hospital having to have an operation. And suddenly you can't see any clients, you can't do any of that particular work. So then that's obviously as well where kind of this side hustle group, my
Yeah.
Facebook group and the podcast has come about actually is about looking at how we balance this income so that you've got the counseling and you've got the coaching, but you've also progressed into sort of an online
Yeah. So
sideline too, and you're really
there's a third thing that I sort of also do. So having worked as a counselor and a coach for something like 7, 8 years now, and those two things really I guess taking up most of my time, and sort of sometimes it's more of one, sometimes it's more of the other, but that sort of worked quite well for me. And then back in 2019, so a couple of years into working as a private practitioner, as a psychotherapist, I decided to join the BPC, the British Psychoanalytic Council, and went through their application process. And one of the things they ask you to think about and then demonstrate as well is that you have a clinical will.
Right.
And I'm not aware, whether you know what I'm talking about there, but at the time it wasn't something I'd really knew much about and hadn't really thought about. And I started thinking about it. I read up on it. I talked to colleagues. A clinical will, just for anyone who doesn't know what it is um, it's more than a document. People might think it's a document, a bit like a will that you write, a sort of normal style will, but it's more than that. It's a process. It's a set of instructions that you create and then discuss, usually with a colleague, for what would happen if you couldn't work any longer, usually in sort of unexpected circumstances as a psychotherapist or counselor. And the main point of a clinical will is to make sure that your clients are contacted in the event that you're ill, or even worse, if you die suddenly, so that essentially they're looked after by someone who's qualified to do so.
And I
That's
think,
what a clinical will is, and that's what I needed to set up back in 2019.
right. So how did you do that for yourself back in 2019?
Yeah, so how I did that initially was with great difficulty. I,
Right.
I I talked to colleagues and I sort of asked them what it was that they do, and I got all sorts of sort of answers. Some people talked about hard copy of hard written a list of client names and contact details that they'd leave somewhere for their colleague to find. And other people talked about Word docs that they would send, password protected, because obviously we need to be aware that it's confidential information. So
Yes.
there's an issue there around making sure that the information is kind of confidential and kept securely. Neither of those were really sort of working for me. In the end, I started playing with a sort of an online spreadsheet that I was sharing with my clinical trustee. So that's the colleague that I've asked to be my clinical trustee. That's the person who would contact my clients.
Right.
But that didn't feel kind of good enough either, because it was a bit clunky, and also it didn't feel very safe. It was just, we both had sort of access through our Google Drive, but it didn't feel sort of safe enough. So I kind of really got thinking about it. So you'll have heard already, having done something different in the past, running a business, that there's an entrepreneurial side to me, and I started thinking about this in terms of a problem that could be solved. And I ended up contacting a former coaching client of mine who won't mind me talking about this because he's now my business partner. But
Right.
he worked in tech, and I'd worked with him on a career change he was making. And one of the things that came out of that was that he wanted to get back to building something like using code. So I
Right.
dropped him a line and said, "Look, I've had this idea," and we'd stopped working by this point. But I dropped him a line and said, "I've had this idea, and I wonder if it's something that you might want to think about with me." And he was interested, and we built a prototype. And if we now fast forward something like 4 or 5 years, we now have an application that's available online, and that psychotherapists and counselors are using to create and keep their clinical wills. And
Right.
that's what I want to. So talking of side hustles, it's something that is very much on the side of what I do, but is kind of growing slowly but surely, and has also been a really interesting thing for me to do.
And actually, very important thing to do as well, isn't
Mm.
it? Because
Yeah.
generally, I mean, I can speak from my training, but people mention that you need a clinical will,
Mhm.
and then you kind of explore what that really means.
Mhm.
But that's as far as almost the knowledge tends to go when you're
Yeah.
training.
Yeah.
A little bit in the same lines of, we're not really taught how we can utilize the skills in different ways. We're kind
Yeah.
of taught how to be counselors or psychotherapists and how to be with a client
Yeah.
and the theory and the knowledge around that. But
Yeah.
actually, the other side of things that are actually really important too can
Really
often be
important.
overlooked, isn't it?
Really important. And again, I sort of, maybe it was sort of easier for me to get started in private practice because I had experience of, working for myself, running a business. But after the event, I'm very aware that, the training I did was really focused on, as you say, the clinical side of things, working with a client, being in a room with them, but then really nothing on, if you're going to go and work in private practice, how do you do that? Like, how do you set up, I mean, everything from, I don't know, the room you're in to, doing your accounts, to paying tax, to marketing, like none of that sort of seems to get any airtime, and you have to sort of feel your way into it. And on the more kind of ethical side, things like clinical wills, I had to sort of find out about that for myself. And I didn't mind doing that because it sort of gave me I guess a nice juicy problem to solve. But I can imagine that we're all busy with looking after our clients and doing that sort of things, that these things kind of get left behind. And that's really what I discovered then through talking to colleagues, was that people either weren't setting up clinical wills, or they weren't doing it in a way that really would meet the needs of what a clinical will is there to do. And that's the really important bit here.
Yes. And
'Cause-
the ethical side of it,
yeah,
confidentiality. So how
right.
does the clinical will work? Like, in the sense that it is a website or an app?
So you mean, how does the platform that I've built
Yes,
work?
yeah, the platform that you created.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe just go back into what a clinical will is in its sort of most fundamental sense. So and having talked to colleagues about their experiences of how, not just what they do, but also how and when they might have needed the clinical will, it really kind of demonstrated through those conversations why this is an important thing. So I've talked to people I've been talking to sort of colleagues, therapists, counselors. I've talked to people who have lost a therapist of their own suddenly,
Right.
and haven't found out that that's happened, and really like how sort of difficult and destabilizing and risky that can be. Also, I've talked to clinical trustees who've needed to sort of act as a clinical trustee for a colleague, but then found that the clinical will that was in place wasn't really up to scratch.
Right.
And again, if you sort of think through what it is, it's about clients really being held, I guess, safely in the event that their therapist can't work anymore, and that they have an opportunity not just to find out sort of what's happened, but that also that maybe an abrupt ending is kind of managed by a colleague appropriately.
Yes.
That they're not left hanging, and that's really what a clinical will is about. So, just to sort of repeat myself, it's not just the document; it's really a process. So, it's about a colleague finding out that they need to contact practitioners, clients, and then being able to do that. So, it's about kind of having access to the right information at the right time. And so, to go back to the platform that I've built, really it's a platform that allows for that. So it brings together the information that a clinical trustee would need, and it also allows for a next of kin to let the colleague know that they need to do what they've been asked to do, and then it allows the clinical trustee to access the right information at the right time, and sort of carry out the instructions that they've discussed with the what I call the practitioner. So you have the practitioner who's the therapist,
Yes.
and then their colleague, the trustee.
Right.
And that's really what it does. So it brings all of that together in a way that's easy to use, but also secure, because obviously it's we've really focused on data security, and it's set up so that the right people access the right information at the right time.
Yeah, and because I was wondering, so say for example, I'm the practitioner.
Yeah.
I have the clinical will. Some clients finish, so then they need to be removed.
Exactly.
So you just access, you just log in.
Exactly. So it take you 30 seconds to log in, and then you can remove a client. You can add a new client very easily. So, what I've found really interesting as a practitioner who uses this myself is it's become second nature.
Yes.
Whenever someone contacts me, even for assessments, so I sometimes do extended assessments, I can put their details in there with a note saying they're in assessment, we haven't started yet, and if we don't go on to work, I can take them out. And I just, I do this really regularly now, sort of almost automatically. It's a bit like, making notes after a session. It's just when someone first gets in touch, or when they end a piece of work, it's just part of how I manage my practice now.
Right.
Which means that I feel really confident that my trustee is going to have the information they need, on a sort of week by week rolling basis, that I don't have to sort of remember to update it every 6 months.
Right. So you don't put any information in there about client work. It's literally just the contact number potentially, and where they're in there, whether they've just been an assessment or whether you've been seeing them for
That's right.
many weeks or
yeah. So if we think about, there's sort of two sides to it ethically. What is a clinical will there to do? It's to allow your colleague to contact your clients in the event they need to. Also, you can include information for other parts of your business, so room rental or professional memberships or your insurance. So any things that you wouldn't want your next of kin to have to deal with, that might relate to your business. But the really important bit is that your clients need to be contacted by someone who's qualified to do so, which is usually going to be a colleague, another therapist or a counselor, rather than a family member or even a solicitor, because they're going to be having a conversation that's clinical in nature. So there's that ethical consideration. And then the other end of it, you also have to think about the information that's being stored. And in line with GDPR, which is also part of our ethical thinking, we need to make sure that we're only using information for what it's meant to be used for, and sort of no more. So a clinical trustee doesn't actually need to know anything about piece of work that you might have been doing with a client, unless it's maybe related to that, I don't know, bereavement might be a trigger, or it's related to sickness, and you might want your colleague to know that that's something to bear in mind when they're contacting something. Beyond that, they don't really need to know much more about what's been going on in a piece of work. So all they really need is the relevant contact details, and that's all a clinical will usually contains.
I mean, it sounds, to me, it's something that every single practitioner should have.
Yeah.
And actually, maybe just they don't know about it. They don't know that
Yeah.
it's out there.
Well, I found this out after the event, but it
Right.
is in the BACP's ethical code. It's in there saying you need to think about this and you need to make a provision. It's in the UKCP's code as well, and the BPC, of which I'm a member, is slightly different in that they don't just ask you to do it; they ask you to demonstrate that you've done it by confirming the names of your trustee or your trustees. They want you to have two.
Right.
So there's obviously, they don't see the clinical will itself because they don't need to, but they ask you to demonstrate that you've thought about this and you've set something up. So all the ethical codes can contain this, talk about this. But again, it's just something, you might read the ethical code when you're, going for accreditation, or, you might speak about it with your supervisor, but it's probably a little bit down the list of priorities because we're already thinking about the work that we're doing with our clients, and we maybe don't think so much about the fact that something like that could happen, even though it clearly does from time to time.
Yes, and unfortunately, this is, and we touched on this earlier, didn't we? When we were just before the Zoom.
Mm.
It's a difficult topic to talk about, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
ultimately, what we're talking about is if we're not here anymore.
Yeah.
But it's something that we can't avoid. We need to
Absolutely.
talk about it because,
Absolutely.
unfortunately, in the world we live in now as well, it just seems to be, sometimes we believe, I think it's from personal experience, we almost believe that things like that don't happen.
Mm-hmm.
From personal experience, I know
Yeah.
it can happen.
Well, I mean, not least as counselors and psychotherapists.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No,
There was a bit of a lag there.
oh,
Yeah, I agree with you. Not least as counselors and psychotherapists, we know that things happen. People do get ill, they do die, things change, and people might cope with those in all sorts of different ways. And I think we have to be very kind of realistic about the fact that counselors and psychotherapists are also people
yes.
to whom things happen. And certainly through the conversations I've had with lots of colleagues, I'm aware that these things they do happen, and there are instances where a clinical will really is necessary. And then if we make the connection to what I was talking about before, that as people who are committed to serving our clients, and we have a duty of care, and we're here to ultimately make sure that people are looked after, essentially. And this is one way that we as helping professionals look after our clients, however difficult the circumstances might be to think about.
Yes, and I'm going to put a link to your website app
Yeah,
underneath this
great.
video, and also in the Facebook group as well.
Thank you. Great, thank you.
But so we've talked quite a lot about actually the importance of it and sort of how it came about for you.
Yeah.
How do you manage your time between sort of running the sort of clinical wheel as a business?
Yeah.
Still see that as a side hustle, or is it almost all just part of everything you do?
Now it's kind of part of everything I do, I'd say.
Right.
5 years ago, thinking about it, 3, 4 years ago, really getting engaged with building it. It was a sort of a different project then. It was about building it. I mean, I was the first user or customer, so my now business partner was sort of building it for me, and I was the kind of the test case. And because I work as a psychotherapist, it meant I could tell him what it needed, what it didn't need, how to make it useful for me. So that was the first challenge. And I'm not a coder. I don't know about that sort of things, but what I did know was what a psychotherapist needed from it. So that was kind of the first, I guess, phase of that project, was really working with him closely to build a first version of it that we then felt so we were able to kind of take out to a group of other practitioners, sort of who I know through my networks, who then gave us some really good feedback. And that was definitely like it was a bit of a passion project and a thing on the side. I mean, as if I didn't have enough to do during COVID, but that's when that
Right,
was
yeah,
happening. And it was just something that was really, it was a really fun, sort of interesting challenge. And, it
right.
was more along the lines of, I've identified this problem that I think has a solution that's, digital and tech based. And then it turned out that we could build that, and then we were able to improve it until I was happy to use it myself. And that was just really good fun in terms of a sort of a challenge, kind of on that level. And then it became something quite different, I guess, in the sense that we had to then think about firstly, what's useful for me going to be useful for other people, and then it became about conversations with other colleagues, and then it started taking up more time because initially my business partner Ed was doing a lot of the build and I just feed back, and then it became about me really engaging with counselors, psychotherapists, colleagues,
Yes.
to ask them what they thought. And that was great too. I mean, still maybe sort of something I did on the side, but it was a really kind of interesting experience, because I think often as counselors and psychotherapists, particularly in private practice, we're sort of doing our own thing. We might know people sort of through membership sort of groups or at supervision groups or kind of informal networks. But I started having a different kind of conversation with colleagues about sort of ethics and particularly clinical wills that I'd never expected to have, and I learned a huge amount, and I really enjoyed that. So that was a fun, and taking up more time. So to your question about time management, I mean, I one thing I love about working as a psychotherapist and a coach is that my time is my own, and I have a family with young kids, so I make that work for me. But I had to sort of start finding time around other things I do, and I've been very aware of that. And I guess I manage that by staying aware of how much time I'm spending on things. I mean, my client sessions are booked in, so I know how many of those I'm doing. And then it's about using the spare time as usefully as possible, but really maybe being aware of the extent to which I'm working versus doing other things, and sort of how much I'm spending on the various things I do. So I'm kind of quite aware of that. And then most recently, now that the platform is up and running and anyone can access it online, you just have to look, like finding any website. It's called clinicalwill.app. You find it fairly easily by Googling it. We've got more users now, and people asking us questions about it. So I've had to sort of start to think carefully about maybe doing less of other things, just
Right.
to find the right balance. So maybe that's a very long answer to your question. It's about really being on top of what I'm spending my time doing, and thinking carefully about that and what I need to do versus what I want to do, and just sort of feeding my way into the balance as I go.
Yeah, so being on top of really your time management, isn't it? I suppose. So it
Yeah,
took a lot more time at the beginning when you were setting it up, then maybe took up less time, but then now as it's getting bigger, you
yeah,
might have more, it's the customer service part of
yeah, yeah,
being a sort of a digital product like that, isn't
exactly.
it?
Yeah. And it's something like I've had, because it's not something I've done before. I mean, I've run a different business before. Then I've been working in private practice, which is about offering my time to people. This is a different kind of product. This is something that sort of is going out there, in the ether. My business partner is always, he's always making sure he's in the code and making sure
Right.
that everything's working
Yeah.
there. But yeah, for me, it's sort of the attention, where I do the work is different, if that makes sense. I can do it at different times. I don't have to schedule in time for this in quite the same way as I do for client work.
Yes. Yeah. So you can be a bit freer maybe with that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And it's often, sort of responding to things, and rather than, scheduling in time. So, I make sure I have enough time every day around other things to give the platform the attention that it needs. But and the two of us, obviously I've got a business partner, so the two of us sort of share the load as well, which is like something else I've had to kind of get back into doing and learning how to do. But I'm really enjoying that. So like I think really for me, it's like I'm enjoying the challenge of doing something quite different than I've been doing for the last 7, 8 years.
Yes. Well, that's one of the things, isn't it? Because client work can be very lonely, particularly if you're working solely in private practice. You're kind of, other than when you're sort of maybe meeting with your supervisor,
Mm,
you're sort of a little bit on your own, aren't you, in
yeah,
working life and your professional life. That's why I've set
yeah,
up some networking events actually specifically for psychotherapists, counselors, psychologists, so that actually we can all network and have that
Yeah.
unity, in fact. But I wonder, what would be your advice for somebody who's watching that says, I'd love to have something online, like a platform online,
Yeah.
whatever it may be, for maybe they're selling resources or
Yeah.
whatever it is. What's
Okay.
your advice with that?
So my advice would be this, I think. The one bit of advice I'd give is the clinical will app thing came about for me because I found something that I found a problem that I had that needed a solution, right? I'd never expected to sort of find that problem particularly. It wasn't like I was sitting there looking for a thing I could build an app around. It started with the problem. It started with the need that I identified for myself and then ultimately for others as well. So I would say my advice would be if you're interested in doing something else, think about things in those terms. You know, where is a need that you think isn't being met? And then start to think about how that need could be met. Now, that may be through a digital platform or something that's, you know, web-based or technology-based or not. You know, it may be as in your case, I know you use digital technologies, but essentially what you're offering is a space for people to come together
Yes.
based
Yeah.
on a need that you've identified. So really that's my advice, because I think the reason I've had so much energy and motivation to do this is because there was a real need there, and it was important to meet that need. And also, you know, just personally, I like learning about new things. I'm curious. It's taken me into conversations. It's taken me into learning about GDPR and, ethics and how we apply those and how we think about those, which has sort of been good for my practice generally. So I've also enjoyed learning a lot of stuff. And I think, you know, anyone who enjoys learning and solving problems is gonna, you know, if they start to think about meeting a need, will find lots of room there to learn some new stuff. And I don't know if that's advice necessarily, but maybe that's me saying one of the unexpected sort of benefits of this is that it's allowed me to learn a lot of things about something I didn't really know about before, and I've really, really enjoyed that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that and it really is good advice, because if there's not a need, but you've got a
Mm,
passion for something. So say, for example, we've got a passion to put
mm,
something together
mm.
and we put lots of money into it and lots of our time, but there isn't a need, it's not
Yeah.
going to sell, is it, ultimately? And then it's
No.
almost wasted energy and wasted time,
Yeah.
resources.
I mean, yeah, there's a commercial argument there. Ultimately, you know, if you're thinking of doing something that's about generating income or, you know, running a business or a part of your business, then you're right. You won't sell something unless there's a genuine need for it.
Yeah,
But I think more on the sort of the personal level,
you do, right.
it's about, you know, the sort of the emotional return on investment is
Right.
that I've been talking to people about something that they really need and are interested in. So aside from the fact that you know, maybe I've made something that's commercially viable, it's also been about how am I spending my time and how do I feel about that?
Right.
You know, this thing really matters. I've discovered there's something here that really matters, and that has felt like a really good thing to spend my time on.
Good. Yes. So you've got both kind of parts
Yeah,
there. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's also fun then, you know, learning about how to build a digital, sort of a tech-based business, which I haven't done before, and how to market that. And that's been an interesting challenge as well. But that's come much later. I think in the first place, it was about sort of solving that first problem. And then it was about finding out a lot more through, you know, reading about things, through talking to people. And that's been a really, I guess, a great kind of rewarding experience for me.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's also having passion for what you do as well, isn't it? Because if you love what
Yeah.
you do, you never work
Yeah.
a day, they say.
Yeah, and look, ultimately, all of this comes from, you know, as I said, I didn't sit there going, I really want to, you know, run a tech business. What am I going to do to make that happen? It started with me thinking about my work as a psychotherapist. I found this small gap called clinical wills, which are really, it turns out, are really, really important. And you know, there was a need for a solution there. But more broadly as well, it's really got me thinking about ultimately my work as a psychotherapist and more, you know, more broadly, kind of how we make sure we stay ethical,
Yes.
you know. And you know, there's a sort of clinical side to that, but there's a practical side as well. And I guess the thing that I've really kind of got stuck into is more the practical side. You know, how do we keep our data secure? You know, how do we do things like clinical laws? I mean, there are all sorts of other things to think about, which I won't go into now, but like just opened up this view, because I think we think a lot about ethics in a clinical, I mean, it's all clinical, but you know,
Yes.
what we might do in a room with a client, or sort of how, you know, how we maintain boundaries. But there are other parts that are maybe a little bit less immediate that I think are worth kind of shining a spotlight on too. And that just happens to be the thing I've discovered and suddenly got really interested in. But
Yeah.
that helps me ultimately as a practitioner, is what I'm saying, because it's really helped me think about how I practice ethically.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where can people find you? So if they're watching this video and
Yeah.
I want to have a look, we're going to put the link for the
Yeah.
Clinical app,
Yeah.
but where can people find you and learn more about you as well?
Yeah, so either through, so the platform is online and it's clinicalwill.app, and if you even if you just Google Clinical Will, you'll find it. It sort of comes up on Google pretty it's at the top there. You can email me through the platform, so there's an email address there. I'm also on LinkedIn, so if you if anybody wants to have a conversation with me, I'm as you might have gathered, I really love talking to people directly like this. So I'm always happy to find time for a call, just to either just to share kind of notes and experiences, or if people have specific questions for me relating to clinical will, say, or how I've sort of done what I've done, built my career, whatever it might be. So you can contact me through LinkedIn really easily, or through the platform itself.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for sharing your expertise, your time, your passion, your business. It has been invaluable to hear and actually very eye-opening, and I think for lots of people, in the sense that actually what we hope as well is that they might watch this, somebody might watch this and go, do you know what, I need to do that.
Yeah, maybe in terms of advice, the last thing I would say, and it relates to getting in touch, is I've had some formal support, some informal support through this. Like, I really value the support I've had. I'm very open to helping other people, develop, explore, build any ideas that they might have. So if anybody wants to get in touch with me, and ask me for some, even just informal advice or support, I'm really happy to hear from people. So maybe the more broad advice is, talk to people, talk about your idea. Don't be too worried about someone running off with it. Like, I think people generally want to help. If you have a good idea and you go and ask for some help from people, they will give it to you. And I think it's way more fun doing these things with people, and the help is out there. So go and get help is maybe the last bit of advice I'd give.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Michael.
Okay.
And thank you too for watching. So thank you so much for being here, for watching. If you've enjoyed the show, please do hit that subscribe. Please share our video as well with everybody that you think needs to hear it. And in the meantime, I'll hopefully see you over on the Facebook group too. And stay amazing. I'll see you soon and keep making a difference in the lives of others.